Continental Carbon is a leading manufacturer of carbon black for the tire and rubber industry. This video is an orientation for contractors performing work for Continental Carbon. A safety orientation will be presented first, followed by a consent decree orientation. Please pay close attention to the information in this video. At the end, you will be asked to sign a group form and an individual form indicating you understand and will comply with everything presented prior to beginning work for Continental Carbon. Make sure you read the terms and conditions on the forms, and if anything is not clear, ask plant personnel.
Welcome to Continental Carbon Company. We want your experience here to be productive, rewarding, and free from any work-related injury or illness. Workplace hazards can be found in most industrial settings. A hazard is anything that can harm people or equipment under the wrong conditions. Some examples include stairs, ladders, and elevated walkways, which present a fall hazard. Objects in the walking path, which present a trip hazard. And forklifts, rail cars, or tractor trailers, or other large equipment, which can present a moving vehicle hazard. Hazard controls are those measures taken to protect people from harm, and they're typically grouped in three main categories. Engineering controls, such as physical guards or barriers. Safe work procedures, which are rules that, when followed, lessen your chances of getting hurt. And personal protective equipment, or PPE, which is worn by individuals as a last line of defense. At Continental Carbon, general plant PPE is required by any person entering, passing through, or working in a designated process area. These areas are indicated on the plant-specific PPE map. Plant PPE includes hard hat, safety glasses, a long-sleeved shirt or jacket worn with the sleeves extended, and steel-toed boots. Hearing protection is also required in areas where loud noise is present. These areas are clearly marked on the plant-specific hearing protection map and are posted with signs throughout the process. Plant PPE and hearing protection requirements are to be observed by all personnel at all times. All Continental Carbon plants are controlled access facilities, with entry granted only to authorized personnel. Upon arrival, individuals should report directly to their designated location. Visitors and vendors must sign in at the main office and remain with their plant contact. All others should limit time and travel in the plant to whatever is needed to accomplish their specific assignment. Some areas are expressly off-limits to all except qualified, authorized personnel. For example, no one may enter a Motor Control Center, MCC, without specific permission from plant management. Personnel may not cross barricade tape, pylons, or entrances to confined spaces, such as vessels, bins, tanks, or compartments, unless their job involves work in that area and they are included on the permit governing that task. Throughout the plant, there are a variety of danger signs, caution signs, instructional signs, and tags. Their purpose is to draw attention to workplace hazards and to stimulate the reader to either take an action or avoid some other action. For example, this sign forbids entry to a permit-required confined space. This lockout tag says not to interfere with equipment being serviced. And this sign reminds individuals of the plant PPE requirements. Information on signs and tags must be obeyed. Eating and drinking is not permitted in the plant. Food and beverages can be consumed in contractor trailers, established break rooms, conference rooms, or outside the fence line. Smoking is permitted only in designated areas, which are clearly marked. Smoking is never permitted inside buildings or while operating equipment. Driving inside the fence is by permission only and is limited to those situations where it's necessary to deliver equipment or material to a specific location. In all other cases, individuals should park outside the gate and enter on foot. The speed limit inside the plant is 5 miles per hour. Vehicles must stop prior to all intersections and railroad tracks and should never pause or park on the tracks. Drivers should be aware that railcars and pedestrians have the right of way over standard motor vehicles. Because this is an industrial facility, individuals are expected to pay special attention to their walking path and to select a safe, unobstructed route whenever possible. Personnel should avoid stepping on or climbing over obstacles or walking on unlevel or unsteady surfaces. When walking inside the plant, pedestrians should be constantly on the lookout for rail, motor vehicle, and powered industrial truck traffic. Individuals should use designated aisles and walkways, should avoid walking on or near rails, and should look both ways before stepping into an aisle, around a corner, or through a door. Anyone not specifically authorized to be in the railcar shed, in the shipping building, or on the dock should stay out. When a forklift, pallet jack, sweeper, or trackmobile approaches, pedestrians should stop, make sure the operator is aware of them, and then move safely out of the way. Standing or walking in blind spots is prohibited. Forklifts present special challenges. When forks are lowered, they're a trip hazard. When raised, they're even more dangerous. Individuals should never walk or work beneath an elevated load. Whenever stairs are accessed, use of handrails is mandatory. Running up or downstairs is prohibited. On elevated walkways, including scaffolds and scissor lifts, no one is ever permitted to stand on railing or to place themselves in a position above railings without proper fall protection. When climbing ladders, platforms, or scaffolds, 3 points of contact is required at all times. That means 1 hand and 2 feet, or 2 hands and 1 foot. No exceptions. If tools or materials are needed, they must be placed in a tool belt or raised and lowered by other means. Finally, if you are involved in an accident, you must communicate it to your supervisor or host immediately, regardless of whether you are injured or not. Continental Carbon is committed to taking appropriate action to prevent accidents, so no matter how insignificant the incident may seem to you, report it at once. As soon as you're able, you'll be asked to provide information about the incident, so please be prepared to share as much detail as possible. Only in this way can plant management know what steps to take to prevent recurrence and to safeguard your friends and coworkers. All individuals and crews are expected to keep their workplace clean and well organized. Dispose of all trash in your work area. Even if it doesn't belong to you, pick it up and throw it away. This goes for waste paper, packaging materials, insulation, and old PPE. Put away tools and equipment as soon as the work is done. This is especially true for hoses, cords, brooms, and other portable tools. Park vehicles in an appropriate location, out of aisles and intersections. Set the parking brake and remove the key. If the vehicle is damaged or requires service, don't wait to report it. Tell your supervisor right away. Regardless of whether you are a contractor or a plant employee, you must be authorized and qualified to operate a forklift, scissor lift, sweeper, or other large equipment, such as a backhoe, trackmobile, or telescoping boom lift. If your job requires you to operate one, you will be thoroughly trained and tested before receiving a certification card. If you're not trained and authorized to use this equipment, don't. Doing so will result in disciplinary action. If you are authorized, you'll be expected to observe basic rules of operation. If the unit is equipped with a safety restraint, you must wear it. Never ride as a passenger or offer rides to others. Never lift anyone or allow yourself to be lifted on the forks. This is only permitted through the use of a special platform firmly attached to the vehicle and while wearing a fall protection device. Lower platforms and booms before moving the equipment. Pay attention to overhead piping, power lines, and other obstructions. If you have to drive into the process area, you must use a leading and trailing spotter. And, per OSHA standards, each powered industrial truck unit must be inspected at the beginning of any shift in which it will be used. Documentation is required. Anyone working at a Continental Carbon facility is expected to be able to identify chemical hazards, to know what controls are in place, to recognize signs of exposure, and to be able to take appropriate action. These are the basic requirements of Continental Carbon's Hazard Communication or HAZCOM program. As part of that program, the facility maintains a Material Safety Data Sheet or MSDS for each hazardous chemical or material on the site. The MSDS outlines chemical and physical characteristics, exposure hazards, and exposure controls, including PPE. Workers have access to MSDSs while at the plant and may locate a specific MSDS by using the Hazardous Chemical Inventory. The inventory is a list of all chemicals at the site and is located with the MSDS book in each department or in the Safety Center. To maintain proper control of hazardous chemicals at this facility, you are instructed not to bring unauthorized materials or products into the plant at any time. In addition, you must not use an unlabeled chemical container, and you must not transfer materials into an unlabeled container, such as a spray bottle or bucket, unless you're authorized and you label it immediately. Under the HAZCOM plan, each and every container of chemical product on our property must be labeled, and that label must contain the chemical or product name, the name and phone number of the manufacturer, and hazards associated with the material. To describe the hazard, most labels will use a picture or symbol. One type of symbol in use at the plant is the NFPA diamond, which has 4 colored sections. Each of these rates the degree of a different hazard on a scale of 0 to 4. Blue stands for health, red for fire, yellow for chemical stability, and white for special instructions, such as no mixing with water. Other symbols might address specific effects resulting from exposure to the material. For example, this symbol indicates the substance is corrosive, meaning that it can easily burn eyes or skin. This symbol indicates the substance is poison, meaning that the material can damage organs if it enters the body. Depending on the material, that pathway into the body might be through inhalation, breathing, ingestion, swallowing, or absorption across the skin. Special PPE, such as a respirator or gloves, may be indicated on the MSDS, on the label, or in job-specific procedures or instructions. If special PPE is indicated, it must be worn. If an individual is exposed to a chemical that can cause damage to the skin or eyes, they must immediately proceed to an eye wash or safety shower and flood the affected area with water for 15 minutes. In a carbon black facility, there are only a few chemical substances that pose a significant threat to worker health and safety. These include the product itself, the oil used to make it, and the waste gas that's generated as a byproduct. The first thing most people notice about carbon black is how easily it contaminates clothes and skin. However, there's no health effect associated with this exposure. Carbon black can be washed off, and clothing can be laundered. And this is a requirement before leaving the plant, if for no other reason than to keep it from soiling your personal vehicle or tracking it into your home. In terms of potential health effects, though, carbon black is primarily an inhalation hazard, meaning that the route into the body would come through breathing it into the lungs. As with any solid particle, be it dirt, lint, cigarette smoke, or carbon black, the less you inhale, the better. In some cases, industrial materials, like carbon black, have limits established to indicate how much exposure is acceptable during a given workday. Carbon black's limit is 3.5 milligrams for every cubic meter of air, which is less than that for normal dust, 5 milligrams per cubic meter, but not nearly as low as the limit set for highly hazardous materials, such as silica or lead, for example, which is 0.05 milligrams per cubic meter. This should give you an idea that while inhalation of carbon black should be minimized, concerns are not the same as those for many more toxic materials. Nevertheless, where significant exposure can be anticipated, respiratory protection will be required in order to stay below the established limit. Oil is primarily a burn hazard. It has to be heated in order to unload it from rail cars or trucks, and once it's injected into the furnace, it reaches temperatures of nearly 500 degrees. No one is allowed to approach, handle, or adjust oil nozzles unless specifically authorized and properly protected by heat-resistant PPE, gloves, and a face shield. If you're exposed to hot fuel oil, go immediately to a safety shower and flood the area for 15 minutes. Waste gas is a byproduct of carbon black manufacturing and contains various amounts of sulfur dioxide, SO2, hydrogen sulfide, H2S, and carbon monoxide, CO. All three of these substances are in gaseous form inside process equipment, and they are serious inhalation hazards. SO2 can be detected because of its rotten egg odor and, depending on the concentration, the tingling or burning sensation it can produce on the surface of the skin. The good news is that these sensations are so unpleasant, they tend to drive the individual away, limiting exposure. If the individual inhales too much, irritation of the nose and throat can result, along with violent coughing. H2S also smells like rotten eggs, but is much more dangerous because the smell can rapidly overpower the senses, leaving the material undetectable and tricking the person into a false sense of security. H2S paralyzes a person's breathing mechanism and can quickly result in death by asphyxiation. CO is a colorless, odorless gas that cannot be detected by human senses. CO binds to hemoglobin in the blood and prevents it from carrying life-giving oxygen to the cells. Moderate overexposure can result in headaches, confusion, and nausea. Severe overexposure can lead to incapacitation and death. In the case of suspected overexposure to any of these substances, removal to fresh air and timely application of medical care is crucial. Because these materials can be deadly, no one is allowed to enter any piece of process equipment without proper authorization, training, supervision, and a confined space entry permit, which carries with it the requirement to sample the atmosphere for these contaminants. A confined space is an area that's big enough to work in, but is difficult to enter or exit, and is not intended for long-term human occupancy. Working in a confined space can present a unique hazard because the employee may be isolated from coworkers and in a cramped or tight spot. Some confined spaces can be even more hazardous because of the quality of the air or the presence of mechanical equipment. Examples in this plant include tanks, vessels, dryers, bag houses, piping, trenches, pits, and sumps. These spaces are called permit-required confined spaces. They require special permission to enter and may only be accessed by trained personnel following special procedures. Each opening must be secured and marked with a warning sign. Unauthorized entry will result in disciplinary action. There are two controls needed to protect against the hazards of moving equipment. The first is machine guarding. The second is lockout-tagout. Machine guards are physical barriers that keep clothing, hands, fingers, and other body parts from becoming entangled in moving equipment. Individuals should never remove machine guards unless specifically authorized. If removal is authorized, machinery should be stopped and de-energized first. Once the task is complete, guards must be replaced. Lockout-tagout is a safe work practice. Where machine guarding protects against injury from equipment that we know is in operation, lockout protects against injury from unexpected startup of equipment that we thought was turned off. At Continental Carbon, locks and tags protect individuals who are working on particular pieces of equipment. Unless you are specifically authorized, do not touch them, attempt to remove them, or attempt to operate equipment being serviced. Wait for repairs to be completed and for authorized personnel to notify you that it's safe to return to your work. The most common type of electrical equipment you'll see in your plant is the standard electrical cord, and the easiest way to injure yourself is to use a damaged one. If you encounter an extension cord, welding lead, or any other electrical cable with cracked insulation, exposed wiring, or a broken plug, report it to your supervisor immediately. It must be properly repaired or removed from service. Electrical tape is not an adequate solution. Report missing junction box covers or other damaged electrical equipment so they can be properly repaired. Never remove the ground prong on an electrical cord. Never attempt to unplug or plug in a cord with wet hands or while standing in water. Never attempt to access or operate electrical panels, breakers, or switches where water is involved. In fact, you should never attempt to use these in the first place unless you have been specifically trained and authorized. At Continental Carbon, fall protection is required when working 6 feet or more above grade, unless railing is in place. This rule applies to those working atop rail cars, tanker trucks, or inside a JLG or forklift man basket. When not in use, harnesses and lanyards must be properly stored to protect them from the elements or from other damage. Damaged equipment must be removed from service and may not be used. Hot work is the name given to any task that produces heat. This includes welding, cutting, grinding, or use of a torch to heat or thaw pipes. At Continental Carbon, all hot work requires a permit. The only exception is when the work is conducted inside a shop or specially designated area that is free from combustible material. That is, items that will burn, such as wood, paper, solvents, fuels, etc. If hot work is to be conducted anywhere other than this special area, a permit is mandatory. The space must first be cleared of combustibles to a distance of 35 feet. If this can't be achieved, the combustibles must be adequately covered with protective blankets or other non-combustible guards. A fire watch with an extinguisher or hose must be assigned and must observe the work and the surrounding area, looking for sparks, smoke, or flame. The watch must maintain this post until at least 30 minutes after the hot work ceases. Our goal is to control hazards before an accident occurs, and to do that, we need your help.
Before getting into the details of the consent decree orientation, we will start with a definition of a consent decree. A consent decree is a legal arrangement to resolve a dispute between two parties without admission of guilt or liability. Consent decrees are frequently used by federal courts to ensure businesses and industries follow regulatory laws such as environmental regulation. In 2007, the Environmental Protection Agency started an investigation into Continental Carbon, and in 2015, a consent decree was signed between the Environmental Protection Agency and Continental Carbon. In the consent decree, Continental Carbon has agreed to significantly reduce emissions of sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, sulfur, and particulate matter, continuously monitor and report any carbon black leaks and spills to properly document cause and corrective actions, and to implement a particulate emissions best management practices control plan to minimize particulate matter emissions. So, what does this mean for a contractor performing work for Continental Carbon? While performing any work for Continental Carbon, the contractor shall take special precautions to minimize particulate matter emissions. If any carbon black leaks or spills are observed, it must be reported to your supervisor. Carbon black must be stored in proper enclosed or covered containers. Continental Carbon has procedures in place for fugitive dust control, industrial waste, and bag filter changeout. Your employer has been given copies of these procedures, and you must be aware of them. If you are uncertain of the procedures, your employer will provide copies to you. Here's a summary of each of these procedures. To control fugitive dust, you must keep your work area clean of carbon black throughout the workday. Waste carbon black must be placed in plastic-lined and covered trash boxes for disposal. Other construction waste must be collected for proper disposal. When the waste is ready for disposal, notify plant personnel. During bag filter changeout, you must take precautions to minimize the generation of particulate emissions. Filter bags must be placed in sealed bags for proper disposal. If you would like to read the consent decree, it is publicly available. In your computer's browser, type epa.gov to get to the EPA website. In the search bar, type Consent Decree Continental Carbon, and then click the link to open the consent decree. Remember, if anything in this presentation is not clear, ask plant personnel. Thank you for your attention. Please help us to be safe and protect the environment.